Longtime fans of Blizzard games often attribute a level of stubbornness to the way that the developers decide to handle their games. And being stubborn is not necessarily always a bad thing, but sometimes it's difficult for us, the players, to understand why some decisions are made. While browsing the Overwatch forums, I came across a number of complaints that ultimately seemed to lack perspective. And naturally, I'm not saying that we, as consumers, are obligated to gain any such perspective in the first place, because at the end of the day, all we do is buying a product and expecting it to work to our satisfaction. Entitlement aside, I have gathered a number of recurring complaints targeting the supposed stubbornness of Blizzard in relation to Overwatch specifically. And today, I want to play devil's advocate. It is worth noting that, personally, I do agree with a number of things on this list, and I too wish that some of them would be handled differently. This isn't so much about excusing developers more than it is about you and me taking a look at these things from a different perspective. We're gonna be talking about all of that and more right after this. If you want to get great games for an affordable price, Humble Bundle is the way to go. Next to all of their ever-changing bundles, Humble Bundle offers their Humble monthly subscription. Every month has new games on offer, and this month's blockbuster title is Assassin's Creed Origins, which you can play early if you subscribe today while waiting for the rest of your games to unlock later down the month. Humble Bundle does not only allow you to support charity with every purchase you make, but I, as a Humble partner, will also get a kickback for every new subscription or bundle purchase you make via my link. There are no strings attached, you can cancel anytime, and all of the games are yours to keep. So what are you waiting for? Get your bundle today by clicking the link on screen or following the one in the description below. If there's one thing that Blizzard developers are famous for in their respective communities, it is for never wanting to admit any fault. While we have seen a bit of a shift in mentality when it comes to World of Warcraft specifically, where Ian Hazzikostas does go out of his way to address current community complaints, a common theme in Overwatch is that the developers never admit to anything being wrong until it really doesn't matter anymore. Time and time again, they've admitted to heroes having been overtuned in hindsight, but it is very rare for one of the Overwatch devs to come out and address something very significant at the time of its relevance. You see, if a developer was to come out and admit that something has been done wrongly, then the immediate response would be demanding a fix. And more often than not, the devs are actively working on trying to fix the problem in question. Naturally, it isn't as simple as plugging in some numbers and calling it a day. Especially when it comes to AAA development, a new patch has to undergo a number of quality control tests to make sure it doesn't break anything on the user's end. It is also worth noting that Blizzard is new to the FPS genre, meaning that they hugely rely on statistics to drive their decisions. They are quite aware that the core community can be very vocal, but that does not necessarily represent the entirety of the player base. Given that lack of experience, turning to numbers is definitely something I can understand. Especially when introducing new characters that bring fundamentally new toolkits, players usually require some time to get used to the change. Apex Legends is a great example. Mirage is a character that allows the player to create decoys, fooling their enemies into giving away their position by shooting it. That was a very effective strategy at the start, but as little as a month later, Respawn Entertainment has reported that Mirage is already far less of an effective character as players have learned and adjusted to the toolkit in question. While we can make the argument that some things are so obviously broken that no statistics should be necessary, and Respawn Entertainment seems to agree with that general sentiment, sometimes it is genuinely difficult to adjust a character in light of the fact that the broad player base utilizes them very differently than what they had expected based on their development process and QA testing. In fact, no testing in the world can compare to the data a live service provides. You simply cannot hire enough people to get the same level of feedback. There are literally millions of us playing Overwatch. There is a fine line to be drawn here when it comes to making the players aware that a problem is being worked on without sounding like you're giving out empty promises because you don't yet have an ETA for a patch. And that gets even worse when, after an initial outrage, players eventually adjust to the latest edition and no change is needed after all. Overwatch is in a very unique position because of its asymmetrical hero design. Given that some characters quite literally hard counter others, the level of severity when it comes to how overpowered or even underpowered a new hero is can change drastically depending on who you ask. Sorting through all of that data is by all means not easy. And this kinda transitions into another big problem that a lot of us really don't consider. But since it covers many of the issues we talk about, let's actually address some of the other complaints first. For example, the argument has been made that if a character or map has been very poorly balanced and the developers are obviously having trouble doing said balancing, the content in question should be removed from the game temporarily as to not hurt the competitive integrity of Overwatch for that time period. It also includes not revisiting things that they admitted they regret having done in hindsight. The most recent example being Jeff Goodman's mention of not liking the increase of projectile speed for Hanzo. And lastly, hotfixing their game more frequently to keep the impact of poor balancing decisions to a minimum. The general consensus for a lot of players is that more patches equals more better game. In light of all the balance issues that Overwatch supposedly has, seeing more balance updates more often can only be a good thing in the eyes of many. And if it's not a balance update, it should be a content update. The reality of it is that the vast majority of players who play video games are casual players. And hear me out on this one, because I know that many of us refer to anyone who doesn't play competitively as a casual player, but we often fail to recognize that the vast majority of players probably never interact with video games in any media whatsoever. There are people that buy a video game, play it a few times a week for a couple hours a session, and call that good enough. Core gamers, competitive gamers, and vocal communities may be the backbone of many games, but they don't make the bulk of the player base. And for people who only play games a few times a week, it's not a good thing to see too many balance changes. It's really freaking annoying to have to update your game every time you load up a launcher. For a while, I had Fortnite installed on my PC, and because I rarely ever played it, mostly just with one particular friend, I literally had to install a patch every time I wanted to play. Where the community might be praising the developers for adding something new every week, for many couch and casual gamers, having to download these patches before being able to jump into the game is not only a chore, but also a waste of their limited time. These types of players don't get the latest and greatest news about any patch in their inbox. They do not want to read up patch notes every other day, and they do not care to watch YouTube videos discussing the positives and negatives of any balance update. In fact, most of you watching probably don't even qualify for that bracket because you did go out of your way to click on this video in the first place. Ideally, the content of every new patch that the end user has to install should be immediately obvious at the time of opening up the game. The developers over at Respawn Entertainment have also, again, acknowledged as much. Who the hell wants to relearn how to use a character or weapon in a video game every time they jump in? Especially if they only have a limited amount of time to spare. And as much as removing problematic content could be a good solution for competitive play, there's a huge difference between Epic Games vaulting a gun and Blizzard Entertainment getting rid of a hero. Creating a new character from the ground up can cost a developer in the neighborhood of $80,000. And by that, it's definitely not a small investment. Naturally, we can always compare the cost of production to the gross profits, but if you go around wasting money like that as a habit, then you're not going to be profitable for a long time. Needless to say that creating a character is a big financial and massive creative investment for a developer. It's hard to argue that removing an overpowered gun has anything close to that level of impact. People don't go around wearing merchandise of vaulted Fortnite guns, but Overwatch as an IP perpetuates the idea of every character having a story. Their impact on the franchise is much greater because they are the driving force behind the fandom. And when it comes to maps, we've only had very rare occurrences of maps actually significantly favoring one side over the other, making a removal unnecessary. It mainly comes down to individual players preferring some game modes over others. Yes, it sucks to play 2CP if you really don't like the game mode, but the issue with allowing players to pick and choose maps is that it comes at the sacrifice of queue times. A price that many of us would gladly pay for the sake of not having to play on Volskaya, but again, for many casual players, fast queues and maximum convenience takes priority. And remember, the competitive perspective of seeing every character and map in very utilitarian fashion is only shared by the absolute vast minority of players, which gives me a chance to throw in a reminder that I too share many of these views when it comes to treating heroes as gameplay related pieces of content first and as merchandise machines second. But this isn't about what I want, because I am part of the minority, and it doesn't make any commercial sense to follow my bidding. In fact, if I was to make requests, I would ask you lovely people to consider subscribing subscribing to the channel if you have enjoyed my content thus far. Anyway, back to playing devil's advocate here. In fact, this one kinda hits close to home, so I don't even know how much of that I have to play. But one example that's related to their attitude of never admitting any fault is them going back on their initial response of saying that a 2-2-2 enforcement is not a good idea for Overwatch, while now they are saying they are looking at this idea more closely. While you can potentially attribute a lack of design direction to these inconsistencies, the reality of it is that sometimes your opinion simply changes. Something that seemed like a really bad idea 2 years ago might be much more appealing today, whether that's due to ever-changing circumstances or just because you as a person have changed. In my history of making videos, there are many things I said that directly contradict each other, and I have even acknowledged as much from time to time. And many a times, just by reading a bunch of your feedback, my opinion on something changes. Or alternatively, just by spending more time thinking about something, I come to realize that I've not considered certain perspectives. And I reckon that it's very similar when it comes to making video games. More often than not, you're working on something secretly before it sees the light of day. Most developers out there are not making games with the intention of delivering a bad product. But if you only have very limited feedback, considering what your colleagues and QA testers say, it's very easy to lose sight of things that to us as players seem very obvious once the thing hits store shelves. And I haven't even begun talking about deadlines. We all continuously learn and grow as people, and as such, we also grow in our professions and hobbies. Just as much as I'm not proud of every video I made in hindsight, a developer is not necessarily proud of every balance decision they made. Case in point, Jeff Goodman's mention of Hanzo's projectile speed. Admitting to your mistakes at the time is not always the best decision from a community management perspective, as it can make an already bad situation even worse by making players aware of something that otherwise they might have never felt bothered by. But it's still a good reference point to learn from in hindsight. Even if I don't go to Twitter and publicly exclaim my shortcomings, I learn from these things as a content creator, and I try to do better next time. And in that same vein, only because a developer does not highlight their shortcomings does not mean they don't learn from it. Our perspective of what makes sense is very different as consumers than theirs as developers, particularly when you start involving upper management and marketing. What looks like sheer stubbornness from the outside could be the result of many decisions they made internally, and from their perspective, these decisions probably make sense. I'm not here trying to say that any of us have to deliver on this level of understanding, because quite frankly, it comes right back to what we talked about at the start. We bought a game, and we expect it to work to our satisfaction. So long that we don't personally attack anyone, we are free to voice our complaints about any and everything that bothers us. And then, in turn, the developers are free to judge whether or not they deem our complaints worthwhile. And the result of this whole relationship is that if the developer pisses off enough players, their game is eventually going to die. And given the fact that Overwatch is still fairly popular, I'm assuming that many of the things we complain about regularly don't actually matter to your average Overwatch player. It's really difficult to find a good balance when talking about this, because I don't want to be dismissive of our complaints, since ultimately they matter to us. But at the end of the day, whether or not any changes are actually taking place depends on how commercially viable that decision is. I mean, they're not running a charity after all. Anyway, given that I very much have a reputation for shitting all over each and every decision Blizzard makes, disregarding the actual accuracy of that statement, I figured it would be a good idea to put myself in their shoes. And I guess you can do with the result of that as you please. Again, nobody's obligated to be that understanding. At the end of the day, all we do is give our opinion from our perspective. But maybe this ends up being some interesting food for thought for some of you guys. I'm curious to see how you feel about this topic, so by all means, feel free to sound off down in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, don't forget to drop me a like on your way out and consider subscribing if you want to see more. Thank you everybody so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.